Welcome to the Word of the Lord, the weekly television broadcast of Living Word Christian Church, proclaiming the good news of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. Pastor Mark Clements' in-depth, relevant biblical teachings will help you in life and living in today's world. Now, let's join Pastor Clements in the service already in progress.
The Bible says that His Word is going to last forever. So if listening to God's Word is a struggle for you right now, I just encourage you to get over it, because His Word's going to last. It's going to outlast this earth. It said it's going to outlast heaven. Heaven and earth may pass away, but His Word is established forever. So we ought to just be happy about listening to God's Word and hearing it, because we know that there are a whole lot of benefits. But wouldn't you do it anyway if there were no associated blessings or benefits? You'd still do it, right? Why? Because we want to obey God, right? It's funny you should mention that. We're going to talk tonight about obedience. Obedience is better. Obedience is better. Obedience to God is a requirement. We have to obey God. But so often, I think maybe it's an American thing. It's definitely a human thing. We love to find ways around things. We love to make our own assessments and loopholes, and maybe we'll call them reasons, but they're nothing but excuses. We love to find those things. And I say love, I don't mean like we're just all a bunch of dirty, rotten old heathens and none of us want to submit to God's Word. But don't you know that there's that part of you that just likes to rise up when you know you're supposed to do something? And don't you just kind of have to sometimes just beat that thing away and say, no, I know what's right and I'm going to obey. But there's just that part of you that still wants to go, but I would like to do it a different way. But obedience is better. Obedience is better than what I know. Obedience is always better than what I can figure out on my own. Always. So I want to talk to you tonight just about obedience. And not because I think that's, it's certainly not here to correct, but this is just what the Lord put on me to share tonight. So if you don't like to hear about obedience, take it up with Him. I'm just going to obey God. How about that? As I was studying this and just looking for some additional resources to help with, I came across this International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, and they made this statement: obedience is the supreme test of faith in God and reverence for Him. Yeah. And that just struck me. Because a lot of times I think we look at obedience like it's some sort of, obligation, like it's just some heavy task. And okay, fine, I'll obey, but we know those verses in Isaiah about willing and obedient. We know they should go together. We kind of look like, I just have to do it because God's in charge and But obedience it's not separate from faith. Obedience is faith. Yeah. Obeying God because God said so is absolutely faith. So when we obey, it is proving our faith, and it shows our reverence for Him. Isn't it Jesus who said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments? If I love God, it ought to show up in my obedience to what He said. So I love to find little quotes like that just kind of reinforce what the Bible says. We're going to look in our Bibles. Well, so open with me, if you would, to 1 Samuel chapter 15. I love the Word, and I'm a doer of it, and we will see how much of that is true in our lives, because we can say it all day long, but if we don't do it, it don't matter. So we're going to park here for a bit. And this is a little bit different for me, because usually I like to kind of consider myself, I'm energetic. I like to be kind of motivative and encouraging, and I talk with my hands a lot. But we're just going to sit in 1 Samuel 15 for a while, and we're just gonna read it, and we're gonna look at what the Bible says about this subject of obedience. And unfortunately, we're gonna look at the example of Saul, who just did it wrong. And this is not the only time. This is not the only time. When we look in these verses and we look at the word obey or obedience or to obey, the Hebrew word that's used there when we see this word is shama or shama. And it means to hear intelligently, often with the implication of paying attention and obedience. It means hearing and obeying. It means to hear, to listen, to give attention, to understand, to submit to, and to obey. If you look in the Strong's Concordance, you'll find all kinds of passages where this word, shama, is used, but the word obey is not what's used in the translation into our Bible. It's hear, hearken, hearkeneth, because we understand the English translation of things, but English to Hebrew is not always like a direct correlation. Hebrew usually goes deeper. There's more picture meaning, there's more association with other concepts, not just alone from one single word or concept. So when I did some studying, and you look at this word shama and how can it mean hear and obey, it's because in the Hebrew language, these two things were so connected that they could use the same word. They didn't need to separate them. In English, I know I can hear. I'll give you an example. Both my oldest kids are in here. I can stand and look at my son Titus, and I can talk, and I can give him instruction, and I can say, Titus, I need you to do this, and I can tell him exactly how I want it done. But just because he was present for those instructions does not mean that he heard it, listened to it, or obeyed it. I can say, I know that you heard me, and I can say, did you hear me? And he could say, yeah. But if there's no correlation to action, he hasn't done the word shama. Because those two concepts are so closely related and associated in the Hebrew language that really it means this hearing automatically to them in this word. Hearing automatically assumed and implied an intent to obey and do something with what was just heard. To respond to the message with action to comply. That's what this word means. So when we see the word or the phrase to obey in some of these scriptures, I want you to keep that in your mind as a picture to say when it talks about obeying, it's not just a simple, did you do the thing? Did you check off the box? But did you hear it with the intention of carrying it out when you heard it? Because once we hear something from the Lord, our responsibility is to obey what we've heard. I'll go back to what Pastor encourages us about being present for church services, because I also can't obey an instruction that I haven't heard. So both parts are required when we look at this word. I have to first hear it, but when I'm hearing it, I have to be anticipating what I'm going to do about it. Amen? So let's look in 1 Samuel 15. Like I said, we're going to go verse by verse. It says, Samuel also said unto Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore, hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. If you read this in a vacuum, if you haven't read through the earlier chapters of 1 Samuel, you might think, oh, Samuel just anointed Saul to be king. But we know if we look back in 1 Samuel 13, 1 Samuel 13 starts out by showing us that Saul had already been king for a couple years. So this is not Samuel saying to Saul, you're now the king. He's saying, the Lord is the one who made you king, and the Lord is the one who sent me. We know if we look backwards, which we will, Saul had a little bit of an issue with pride, and he had a habit of not obeying God. So here comes Samuel, and he says, the Lord sent me to anoint you to be king over his people. Basically, hey, Saul, do you remember who did this thing? Do you remember this position that you're sitting in? Please remember, you've had some successful years here. Please remember, Saul, you didn't do this. Remember, God sent me to anoint you. He's putting him in remembrance of how this all came to be, to remind Saul that the position he's in is because of God. And the position that Samuel is in is also a result of God's divine plan. And he's just starting off their conversation right here so that we're all on the same page. God is the one who is dictating what's going on here, Saul, right? But we already know that Samuel had already told Saul that the Lord would remove him from this office, from his position as king. If you look back in 1 Samuel 13, we see that happen. This is the account of, do you remember when Saul, they were in battle, and then they needed to offer sacrifice to the Lord, and Samuel was the one who was anointed and appointed to do that. And Samuel told Saul, wait. And Saul waited and then said, well, let's see, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. I guess I'm going to have to do it. So Saul went in and did this himself. We look in verse 8, he said, and he tarried 7 days according to the set time that Samuel had appointed, but Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him, from Saul. The people were scattered from Saul. And Saul said, bring hither a burnt offering to me, and peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. And it came to pass that as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. Of course, right? It's usually how it is. You ever disobey God? And as soon as you get done doing the wrong thing or not doing the right thing, then the thing you were thinking you were getting away with or whatever, just like the spotlight just shines on whatever just happened. We see Saul seeking the approval of the people rather than the approval of God. The people were scattered from him, from Saul. He didn't like that. And so he's looking and saying, well, we're here, we're all supposed to be doing this thing, and I am the king. And Samuel, the prophet, let's go. Don't you know you're on the king's time here? Let's get this done. And then, as time goes on, he's watching the people kind of filter away, and the crowd is dwindling, and he's kind of going, well, we got to get something going. Otherwise, I'm not going to have anybody around. So let's bring it to me. I'll do it. This was not his office. He was not approved to do this. He's completely out of order by trying to do someone else's job. This is not in his wheelhouse. This is not in the acceptable service for him as king. He's not supposed to do that. It's out of order. But he did it anyway because he wanted to make sure those people were back in there. And maybe he did that with the heart of, I don't want the people to be lost, but what we'll see in chapter 15, it sure doesn't jive with what we see in Saul. So here we go, verse 11 in chapter 13. Samuel said, in verse 10, let me finish that. As soon as he made an end of the offering of the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might salute him. Right. You remember when you were a kid? Maybe mom and dad went out to run errands or something, or they were at work, and maybe it was you by yourself, you and your siblings. Something in the house did not go according to plan that day, right? Maybe there's a new hole, or something's missing or broken or out of place. And, as a kid, what did you try to do? You heard that car come in the driveway, and what did you do? You ran like, oh, hey, Mom, how are you? It's so good to see you home from work. Why? Because you're just trying to get ahead of the problem, right? You're just trying to, I wonder if that's maybe part of what Saul's doing here. He gets done doing the thing that he knows he is not. This is not an issue of, oh, he was just confused. No, he knew he's not supposed to be doing this. And as soon as he gets done, he looks and goes, are you kidding me? Hey, Samuel. It's so good to see you. Right on time, brother. Amen. Just wanted to come out and salute you. He went out to go greet Samuel. Notice there is no reciprocal greeting. It's not, oh, hey, Saul. He just walks right up and just goes, what have you done? What have you done? And Saul said, because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that you camest not within the days appointed, and the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. Therefore said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself, therefore, and offered a burnt offering. Excuses, excuses, excuses. And in verse 12, Samuel, let it be known, I didn't want to. I had to force myself to do. I didn't have a choice. I mean, the people and the Philistines, and we had to offer a sacrifice to God. So, I didn't want to, but I had to. Excuse after excuse after excuse into just deception. He's deceiving himself. Trying to validate his own disobedience. And then we see in verse 13, Samuel said to Saul, you've done foolishly. You've not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now would the Lord have established the kingdom, thy kingdom, upon Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought a man after his own heart. And the Lord has commanded him to be captain over his people, because you have not kept that which the Lord commanded you. Ouch. Harsh? Not really. Because what we see, the implication in verse 14 is, God anointed Saul to be king over his people, but he did not have God's heart. And in order for God's people to be where he wanted them to be, he needed a leader who was after his heart, not after his own. And so he told him, Saul, this is the beginning of the end for you. Back to chapter 15, verse 2. It says, thus saith the Lord of hosts. This is Samuel talking to Saul again. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he had laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Pretty clear instruction, wouldn't you say? Obliterate them from the face of the earth. And Saul gathered the people together and numbered them in Telalim, 200,000 footmen and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to a city of Amalek and laid wait in the valley. And Saul said unto the Kenites, go, depart, get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For you showed kindness to all the children of Israel when they came out of Egypt, so the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. Did God tell him to do that? We don't see that in Samuel's address to Saul. He said, go and you destroy them, all of them, and all of their stuff. Erase every memory of them from the face of the earth. And Saul went, got ready to go, and then tipped off another group of people. That might not seem like a big, because it sounds like he had a really good reason. Right? He had a really good reason. They were good to the people of Egypt, or the people of Israel. So, just giving you a heads up, guys, separate yourselves. Here's the problem I have with this is if they were needing to be separated from the Amalekites, then they were together with them when he went to give them this warning. If they're partners, if they're cohabitating, if they're, buddies, I just kind of wonder, did they sign a confidentiality agreement before he had this conversation? Or is it possible that maybe God didn't want him to go and tip them off? Because maybe a couple of Amalekites slipped by because they hear him talking, or, one of these Kenites, they were really, tight with somebody, so they let them know, hey, Saul just came down here and said he's going to destroy you guys, and we got to get out, so we're leaving. Well, now they know he's coming. And now what if that guy pretends to be a Kenite, and now Saul literally cannot obey God because he's supposed to get them all. And he just tipped off these people and let them. So anyway, that's not what God said to do. So verse 7, Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until you come to Shur, that is over against Egypt. So Saul did what God said, kinda. I don't know if all the Amalekites resided from Havilah until you come to Shur. But that's where Saul stopped. He must have been real sure. Verse 8, and he took. Who took? Saul took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Saul didn't obey, because partial obedience is not obedience at all. It's all or nothing. God wants you to obey, obey. That means every part of what was said. I don't get to say, well, I did what you wanted, except for, then you didn't obey. Then I didn't obey. That's how it works. You remember Naaman? Naaman, he's told by Elijah's servant, how dare he? In 1 Kings 5, he tells him to go and wash how many times? 7 times. Do you know that Naaman wasn't healed at 6? He wasn't healed at 5. He wasn't healed at 4. He had to obey the whole way in order for it to come to pass. God expects complete obedience. And I was having a conversation with one of my kids just recently. That's an oxymoron. Complete obedience it's like saying water is wet. It's like wet water. Yeah, obedience is complete, because if it's incomplete, it's not obedience. Right? So into verse 9, but Saul and the people spared Agag. So all of a sudden we're like, Saul spared him, took him alive, and now we've got the people involved too. And so Saul, we see back here that Saul, in verse 8, he took the king. Saul took the king, and the people were with Saul, and they spared not only the king, so the people stopped short of doing what they were initially told, because their leaders stopped. And they spared the best of the sheep the best of the oxen, all and the fatlings and the lambs, and all that was good. Well, good for who? And would not utterly destroy them. Would not. Please see that. Would not. Not could not. They were capable. They decided this is enough. They decided we have a better way. They chose to do it their way instead of his way. But everything that was vile and refuse, well, that they utterly destroyed, right? Well, sure you did. Because it's of no use to you. But it looks to me like these folks that went with their leader, Saul, to go destroy the Amalekites, they stopped short of taking out the leader, and then they got looking around going, we've destroyed all the people. We got this guy in chains. We destroyed all the nasty stuff, but look at all the good stuff that's left. I mean, should we? No, we won't. So they didn't. Verse 10, then came, right? Isn't this just how it happened in verse 13? Then came the word of the Lord unto Samuel. Soon as it happened, they got done not obeying, and the prophet knew it. God spoke to Samuel and said, it repents me that I have set up Saul to be king. Not because God makes mistakes. God is disappointed that as he has set Saul in, Saul has not seized the opportunity to do it the way that God told him to do it. For he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto the Lord all night. And when Samuel rose early to meet Saul in the morning, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set him up a place, and is gone about, and passed on, and gone now to Gilgal. If you read through that without actually stopping and understanding what just happened, you miss something. I think sometimes we can read through the Bible and try to, because they do this with, just think of like superhero movies. When I was a kid, you had Superman and the bad guys. And if you weren't with Superman, you were a bad guy. Fast forward to 21st century superheroes, and there's the good guys, but they're not all good. And there's the bad guys, but they might be kind of good. And so you're just kind of always torn by the directors and the movie people because there's good and bad in all of it, and so you don't know. And so you cheer for the guy you think is good, and then they do this plot twist, and he's actually the bad guy the whole time, but he was kind of good. So it was like, is it kind of good? Is he a little bit okay? It's not like that. Saul disobeyed God. When we look at this, it's not like, well, I just have empathy for Saul, because I really think his heart was not in the right place. How can I say that? Because in 1 Samuel 13, he says, you have been removed. God is taking you out. Why? Because he found somebody who has his heart. Because clearly Saul did not. Saul's heart was not in the right place. Saul's heart was for himself. Saul's heart was for what he wanted to do and not what God wanted him to do. He had departed from it. And that's why the judgment was so harsh for him, because it was clearly he had severed that. Maybe it was like that at the beginning, but something happened, and Saul was all about the prestige, the position, what was in it for him. He got the big head and decided he could do what he wanted when he wanted to, the way he wanted to, and it didn't matter what God said. This is where Saul is at this point. So Samuel goes to meet Saul. Not that Saul's dodging him, but what does he do? He goes out to find Saul, and somebody meets him and says, well, he did come here, and he set him up a place, but he's gone now and he went down to Gilgal. It sounds, okay, that sounds kind of normal. But do you know what that actually means when it says he set him up a place? He established a monument to his victory. He just won, Saul just won, and disobeyed God. Remember, there's this bleating of sheep following him, and he's got the king in chains, and all of this was supposed to be utterly destroyed. Saul was so proud of his disobedience that he established a monument to it. Yikes. You kind of sit back and just go, what an idiot. What a dummy. Like, God set you in this position, in this office, to lead his people? Don't you know if you just do it his way? Samuel said that to him in verse 13, in chapter 13. Don't you know if you would have done it his way, he would have established your kingdom over Israel forever? But instead, you wanted this temporary moment for yourself. So Samuel goes and finds Saul, comes to Saul, and Saul said to him, "Blessed be thou of the Lord, I've performed the commandment of the Lord." Again, isn't this just kind of like that, oh, I heard the car in the driveway. Hey, Samuel, how are you? Nothing to see here. Just, blessed be the... What are you doing? What are you doing? I also kind of feel like, being raised by a pastor in even like ministry things, protocol and things, I know when there is a senior minister, I don't talk. They should talk, right? You always defer to the one higher in authority. The prophet was higher in authority than the king. That's why the prophet could come and anoint the king. The king didn't go call the prophet to come and anoint himself. Saul runs out there and gets the first word instead of waiting for, it just struck me as, what's Saul doing here? Is he trying to like usurp the role? Is he just trying to, he uses some choice words. Blessed be thou of the Most High. I feel like the blessing from God should come from the prophet. Like if we're going to start a conversation between the king and the prophet, I feel like the prophet ought to be the one bringing the blessing of the Lord, not the other way around. Something I observed. Again, you won't see that reciprocal greeting from Samuel. Samuel said, "What meaneth then?" Because remember, the end of this statement is, "I have performed the commandment of the Lord." So Samuel says, "Is that right? Then tell me, King Saul, what am I hearing? What is the meaning of this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?" Busted. You're caught red-handed. What does Saul say? Just a verse or two verses ago, what did he say? "I have performed the commandment of the Lord." Samuel calls him on the carpet for his disobedience, and then what does he say? Yeah. But they, you see, Samuel, now all of a sudden it's not about, didn't he just erect a monument to himself? It didn't say he erected a monument to the people for their great victory. He erected a monument for himself, and now he gets called out on his disobedience and says, Samuel, let me just level with you. Oh, these people. These folks that I have. I mean, it reminds me of this woman you gave me, Lord. They did it. They've brought from them. They brought them from the Amalekites. For the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice. And I wonder if you ever been, maybe not recently, think back to when you were like a rebellious little child before your parents had trained that out of you. You ever just start talking and the excuses are just kind of rolling in as the words are coming out of your mouth? I feel like that's what Saul's doing right here. Because the first thing he says is, I obeyed the commandment of the Lord. And then he says, yeah, but the people, and they spared the best of the sheep and the oxen, and I wonder what we could do. To sacrifice. Yeah, to sacrifice. That's it. That's right. I remember now, Samuel. The people, we decided that we would take all the best so we could sacrifice it to the Lord. Put the halo right here. But we just read that back in verse 9, Saul's the one that spared the king, and he's in charge, right? The king is in charge of the army. Ultimately, this is his issue anyway. What a ridiculous leader to blame his people. You're in charge of a team of people, and they don't perform. That's on you as the leader, not on the people. The leader then deals with the people if they didn't go right, but the ownership, the responsibility is on the leader, right? What a cowardly thing to do. Get called out on your disobedience and start blaming your people. Yuck. If God hadn't told him the kingdom was going to get ripped out of his hand, it would have shown up anyway, because how long will these people follow a king who's just constantly like putting all the blame on them? Yeah, we'll go to war for you, boss. Sounds good. What are we going to get blamed for this time? Verse 16, then Samuel said unto Saul, will you stay here? Will you stay here and let me tell you what the Lord said to me tonight? Samuel puts it up to Saul. You clearly have severed your conscience here, your willingness to obey God. You're giving me excuses. You're blaming people. You're just talking around in circles trying to get out of this thing. Will you just let me tell you what God told me tonight? And he wants to know, is Saul going to actually even listen to me deliver this message from God? Is it even worth saying? And Saul says, go ahead. Yeah, speak on. Tell me. I'll take it. And Samuel says in verse 17, when you were little in your own sight, were you not made the head of the tribes of Israel and the Lord anointed you king over Israel? Because at some point in time, Saul was humble. He was small in his own sight. Something changed. Pride came in. And so then we see in verse 18, the Lord sent you on a journey and said, go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they be consumed. In the margin of my Bible, the word consumed is also noted to mean exterminated. God wanted them gone, completely eradicated. He did not do that. You didn't do that if you left stuff and brought their king. You didn't. So here's, verse 18. He's reviewing the instructions that were given. This almost reminds you, like, you ever have like a performance review with your boss? They sit down and, all right, let's go over your goals, and now let's go over your performance. In verse 19, this is the performance review. Wherefore then you did not obey the voice of the Lord, but you didst fly upon the spoil. What's that? You swooped down on the plunder like a vulture, like some sort of, not like a predator. You just watched and you just took the opportunity that you saw to swoop in and take it for yourself. And you did evil in the sight of the Lord. He's in. Didn't you do this? Is this not what you did? Saul, this is what I see happened. And Saul said unto Samuel, I want you to catch this, because there's a question mark at the end of Samuel's statement here in verse 19. He said, didn't you do this and didn't you do this? They're true, right? What does Saul say in response to this? Yes, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. He just got done telling. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody and you feel like you're on the same page, speaking the same language, and they repeat back what you just said, and it's like not anywhere close to what you just said? This is what just happened. Samuel says to him, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you did do this instead, and you did do this, which is evil. Yep, I obeyed. Sure enough. And I've gone the way which the Lord sent me, and I've brought Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. Did you or didn't you? Did you destroy them? If you did, he's not here. The king of the Amalekites is an Amalekite, right? I mean, I can just imagine Samuel looking at him like, do you understand the stupidity that's coming out of your mouth right now? Like, this does not make sense. And then he gets into verse 21. Here we go again. But the people took of the spoil. So he's deceiving himself by saying, I did what God commanded and I took. Because now he believes it. Yeah. It's not, yes, I destroyed them all. Yeah, but I did keep him alive. He said, yes, I destroyed all of the Amalekites and I kept the king. He's repeating it back as if this was part of the instruction. He is now deceived. Yeah. Verse 21, but the people took of the spoil. The people are the ones. I didn't swoop down. The people did. They swooped down and took the spoil, sheep, oxen, chief of the things which should have been utterly destroyed. He's just throwing them right under the bus. Yeah, Samuel, you're right. It should have been destroyed, but these people. But don't come down too hard on them because they did it so that they could sacrifice to God. Saying, right? Oh, but don't you see how good our motives were? Because really, it's to sacrifice to God. So we see in verse 20, we see that he has this rebuttal. He's validating his disobedience. He's giving excuses. Verse 21, he blames the people. Again, isn't he the one in charge? The problem with his statement there, when he tells them, he tells Samuel that the people kept these things to sacrifice unto the Lord. The obedience was the sacrifice. Yeah. That was the sacrifice the Lord wanted, was for you to obey. Not for you to make up some other way to do it. Not to say, oh, I know God said, bring all your tithes into the storehouse so that there's meat in his house, but I've decided that this ministry that I listened to online is also worthy of that because they're saying nice things too. But that's not what God said to do. You don't get to do it your way. You have to obey. We have to just do it the way that he said to do it. He blames the people. And then in verse 22, kind of a famous verse, Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying? Basically, is the Lord more concerned with the motions of bringing offering and sacrifice, or is he more concerned with obedience to what he said? And then he says in later on in that verse, behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. Hearken, obey, they're the same thing. To listen to what God says with the intention of doing it completely is what he wants more than what he wants you to think is a better idea. It's not about what I think is right. It's about what he said is right. I'm not the standard. I'm not the standard setter. I just follow what God said to do. And I'm safe. And then he goes on in verse 23, for rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he's also rejected you from being king. This isn't the first time Samuel said something like this to us. Remember? We saw it in chapter 13. This is not the first time. This is not revelation to Saul that God is not going to have him continue as king. He's just pointing it out. I think Samuel really did want Saul to get it. He did want Saul, because he cried over him all night when the Lord brought this correction to him. He's just trying to level with him. This is what happened. And this is why this end of your kingdom, this is why it's coming. Because you did all this stuff. And notice he says two things, both of these things. Rebellion, doing it his way instead of God's way. That was Saul. And stubbornness. There's no repentance. There's no submission. There's no admission of guilt. Just excuses. Just Saul reiterates, first in 1 Samuel 13, then again. He just goes back and forth to these excuses, not owning it. And Samuel has to tell him, hey, again, this is why. Remember that thing I told you before that was kind of harsh? This is why. You just see that guy on TikTok or whatever that does like the... This is Samuel walking over like, if you're ever wondering, Saul, why your kingdom is being pulled from you, verse 24, Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Saul finally concedes that what he did was wrong and admits that he was concerned most about what people thought rather than what God thought. Verse 25, now therefore I pray thee, pardon my sin and turn again with me, that I may worship the Lord. Saul asks Samuel to forgive his sin and go back with him in the sight of the people. He wants Samuel to come with him, tell him he's okay, and then walk back down amongst the people so that they could all see that the prophet isn't holding this against Saul, because they all knew that he did it wrong too, because the first instructions were do it this way. Samuel said to Saul, I'm not going down there with you, for you've rejected the word of the Lord. And the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. And Samuel turned around to leave. And Saul laid his hand upon his mantle, and it ripped. You don't touch the prophet. You don't go grab him like he's just some guy. Again, you see, Saul just repented. He just admitted, and the next thing he does is, I'm big enough to put my hand on you and physically demand that you come with me. And Samuel turns around and says, the Lord has rent the kingdom of Israel from you this day and has given it to a neighbor of yours that's better than you. Just a teachable moment. Like, since you ripped my mantle, let me just inform you of something. Let me just remind you of something that I've already said to you. And also, Saul, I'm not done speaking to you, the strength of Israel. In my Bible, it's a capital S. Will not lie nor repent. He won't do anything needing to be repented of, and he won't make mistakes, for he is not a man that he should repent. Reminder, Saul, you think you're the man, and the strength of Israel is not you. Then he said, I've sinned, yet honor me now as the king. I pray thee, before the elders of my people, and before Israel, and turn again with me, that I may worship the Lord thy God. Saul repents and asks for Samuel to show him the respect of the king so that the people see him. The honor that people give cannot be a replacement of the honor that God gives. We see that in John 5:44. It talks about that. God will honor you in a way that no person can ever truly honor you. God will set you up, and no man could ever do what God can do in you. Saul's just looking and saying, Saul understands this. I understand God is not going to honor me, but will you at least help me save a little face here and help me go worship God? Maybe he's truly repentant. I mean, that's what we have to believe, that he's actually going, because then it goes on to say that he went, Samuel turned again after Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. Saul worshiped the Lord. Doesn't say Saul pretended to worship the Lord. Saul was repentant and he worshiped the Lord and the prophet, but it does not say that he went down into the people. It said that he turned around and they worshiped God together. Because then Samuel said, bring to me Agag, the king of the Amalekites. If he would have gone down with Samuel into all of the people, he wouldn't have had to say, bring him to me. Samuel stayed up here, because he was not going to let the people confuse this. He was not going to tell them it's all okay. He said, Saul, I'll tell you what, you're repentant. Let's worship the Lord together. But I'm not about to go down here and let all of these people think that you are right. You did it wrong. They know it. You know it. Let's worship God. But I'm not going to go down there and validate this in front of all these people. But I do believe that Samuel understands, and the Lord understands. If he'd have just chopped him down in front of all those people, how would they have received from a leader? How would they have been in order or in proper order under their king if they were all part of this conversation? It happened away from them. The discipline came, the correction came, the repentance came, they worshiped the Lord, and Saul was still king for a while because God knew the timing wasn't there. David wasn't ready. So God still needed his people to have a leader. And we know that where Saul eventually ended up with all of this, but God needed that structure to still be in place because God is a God of order. So he's not just going to let his people be scattered again. So we see in verse 32, verse 31, verse 32, verse 33, Samuel says, verse 32, Agag says, hey, Samuel, surely the bitterness of what we did to you guys back there when you were coming out of Egypt that's water under the bridge, right? And Samuel says to him, as your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women. And Samuel cleans up Saul's mess. He dispatches Agag. And verse 34, then Samuel went up to Ramah, and Saul went up to his house, and Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord again, he was disappointed. He was sorry that Saul went this way. He wasn't repentant of his decision. God made a decision, and Saul had the opportunity to obey or disobey. That's not on God. God doesn't make mistakes. Obedience is better than sacrifice, but obedience is never based on my opinion, on my agreement, or on what I want. Obedience is always what God wants me to do. I don't give excuses in obedience. That doesn't happen. Because if I had to give excuses, I didn't obey. And if I didn't obey, I want to be open and able for God to correct me so that he gets me back on correct. I don't want to be off. I don't want to be in error. I want God to be able to correct me. Well, it'd be really easy, but I haven't heard God talk to me. God clearly talked to Samuel often. I don't hear that. Really? Show up here Sunday morning at 8:30, and we'll have a service, and your pastor will stand behind this holy desk, and you will hear the voice of the Lord for your life. Every time you open this Bible, this book, and you read what God said, you're hearing the voice of the Lord. Stop complicating this and making it so spiritual sounding and say, oh, I haven't heard from, yep. So put your face in the book, have your rear end in the seat and your ears open to hear what the man of God says to you, and then go out and do it. That's what our call is to do, isn't it? I'm not going to win. We see in this account Saul so much trying to manipulate words. You will not win a word game with God. You're not going to manipulate God. You're not going to find a loophole. You're not going to find the way God said it was this, and I'm going to twist it back around on him. You are not going to win that battle with God. It's not going to happen. His word is truth. It's the standard. It reveals his will, and it will remain forever. Also, understand this. Covenant with God is not subject to negotiation.
Amen. Come on.
This isn't a human-created contract or idea. So when God says this is the way, this is it. We're not in negotiation for what I want out of this. I'm not sliding the note across the desk to say, well, this all sounds good, but that's what I need. It's a take it or leave it proposition here. Because words mean something. And when God says it, that's what he meant. I loved it so much when Reverend Tony Cook was here, and he's reading through a scripture, and he says, now, you know what this means is, and then he just repeats exactly what the verse said. You know what God means here is obey him. That's what God means when he says obey. But we see again back into these accounts of how this word to obey, how it matters, how it correlates to doing the thing, hearing the thing, and automatically having those two go together. It reminds me of James chapter 2, and you can look at this yourself, in verses 14, 17 through the end of the chapter, where it says faith without works is dead. Back in Isaiah 1:19 and 20, where it talks about the willing and obedient have the best. They'll eat the best that there is in the land. Why? Because my obedience, my hearing and automatic doing of what God said, they're so closely related, just like faith and works. Just like that quote I read, that obedience is the supreme test of faith. If I obey, if I do what he said, I'm displaying faith, because I trust that God told me to do it this way, and it's going to work out when I do it his way. Obedience is better. Obedience is God's way. Obedience brings the promised blessing, but disobedience breeds deception. James 1:22 through 25. And you see that in Saul. He disobeyed, he convinced, and he believed it. He was deceived because his disobedience bred deception in him, and he was lost. And it began the end of Saul. We are supposed to be obedient to the Lord. And like it says in Isaiah 1, the willing and obedient, you'll have the best that there is in the land. But when we disobey, when we decide to do it our own way, we are subject to the results of whatever it looks like when I do things. His ways are higher than my way. His ways are better than my way. And if I want to tap into the covenant promises that he has established, then I can't negotiate on my obedience, on my terms. I just need to obey. And when I do, he is able. He's always able to perform what he said. But I put myself in the position now to receive that just by hearing and automatically doing what he said for me to do. That's a good word, isn't it? Amen. Well, let's pray.
Thank you for watching The Word of the Lord, the weekly television broadcast of Living Word Christian Church. Living Word Christian Church welcomes you to join us at 2015 Ward Avenue in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Sunday mornings at 8:15 and 10:30, and Wednesday evenings at 7. For more information on Living Word Christian Church, visit us on the web at lwcclax.com.